Ilhan Omar does not do tentative. She does not do apologetic. She does not do careful. She built her entire political identity on the idea that the establishment was fragile, and she was not. That the men across the aisle were running out the clock on borrowed credibility, and that the only thing separating her from the future she represented was a room full of people, too scared to follow her into it. She had walked into rooms like this one 100 times. Committee hearings, press gauntlets, town halls that turned hostile. She had a formula, and the formula worked. Lead with offense, define the terms before anyone else can make the fight about identity, and framing before it can become a fight about facts. And when the room pushes back, claim the pushback is the proof. Call it fear, call it bias, call it anything except what it actually is, which is a question that deserves an answer. She had built a career on being the most dangerous person in any room she entered. She walked into room 562, and it was not her room. She would not figure that out for almost 40 minutes. John Kennedy of Louisiana is the kind of politician that people in Washington consistently underestimate, and he has spent 20 years making them pay for it. He does not look dangerous. That is by design. He has a slow drawl and a dry wit and a way of asking questions that sounds less like cross-examination and more like a man, genuinely puzzled by something he saw on the drive over. He is fond of self-deprecation. He refers to himself as a country lawyer. He mentions the Louisiana heat. He makes jokes about his reading glasses. He went to Vanderbilt. He went to Oxford. He has a law degree from Virginia. None of that is in the persona. The persona is the point, because a man who seems like he is barely keeping up is a man no one bothers to outmaneuver before he has already done it. He had asked for Omar by name. Word had circulated. The cameras were up and burning before she arrived. She arrived like someone who already knew what the headline was going to say. She opened with a statement that she had clearly rehearsed and was clearly proud of. Before the formal proceedings began, she leaned into her microphone and announced, with the controlled confidence of someone who has run this play many times, that she wanted to be transparent with the audience watching at home about the nature of what they were witnessing. She was being questioned, she said, by a man who had never engaged with foreign policy in any meaningful way. A man whose entire worldview fit inside the borders of one southern state. A man who mistook the speed of his speech for the weight of his thinking. She extended the critique outward to the men watching at home who treated geography as character, who believed that where they were born granted them insight that others had to earn. She was the future. She said, what she was facing across the table was a display case in a museum. The room received it. The applause she anticipated did not come. The silence that came instead had a texture to it. Not hostile, not supportive, evaluative. The room was watching Kennedy to see what the museum exhibit would do. He thanked her. He meant it without meaning it, which is a different thing. He said it in the voice of a man in no hurry. He said he had learned a great deal from her opening remarks. He said the word educational, the way a man says it, when he is describing a thing that was not in any way educational, but he is too polite to say so directly. He told the room he was a simple country lawyer. He mentioned Louisiana. He mentioned the courthouse without air conditioning and the judge who had known him since childhood. He said he was going to ask her the first kind of questions, the simple kind, the kind a slow old fellow from Zachary could track without losing his place. And then, before anyone could settle into the warmth of his self-deprecation, he told her to hold on to something. He said they were going to need it shortly. Nobody laughed. The room leaned in. The first 20 minutes were almost courteous. He asked procedural things. How long has she served on this committee? Did she find the work meaningful? Did she approach her public statements with the precision of an attorney, weighing each word for its implications? Or did she speak from instinct and trust the words to find their landing? She told him she said exactly what she meant, always. In every room, she did not pretest her convictions against the comfort of her audience. If that made her a target, it was a target she had learned to carry. Kennedy nodded like a man taking communion. Slow and reverential, he said it reminded him of something his father used to say about a man's word being the only thing that traveled everywhere with him. He said it was a fine principle, and he meant that. He asked if she spoke Somali fluently. She said she did. He said he admired that. He had trouble with English most mornings. The room laughed. Warmer now, his side, not hers. And then he stopped being gentle about it. He told her he wanted to get something on the record, clearly, so there would be no room later for disagreement about what had been established. She had confirmed in this room, in front of these cameras, that she said what she meant and meant what she said. That language was not a variable, that Ilhan Omar in English was the same Ilhan Omar in Somali. Same woman, same position, same commitments. He told her to hold that thought tight. He said they were going to need it here directly. The page he lifted did not look like much. He picked it up the way you pick up a grocery receipt. No ceremony, no dramatic pause. He adjusted his glasses and read from it in a flat, level voice, a sentence she had delivered at a public event several years prior. A sentence about September, about the morning of September 11th, about the men who executed the attack on the World Trade Center. Some people, she had said, did something. He set the page down. He pressed it flat with 2 fingers. He looked up over the tops of his glasses, and he took that sentence apart, the way a man takes apart a clock, piece by piece, methodically, without heat, which was what made it so effective. He talked about the people inside those buildings, not abstractly, specifically the ones who had packed ordinary lunches that morning for ordinary days that did not become ordinary. The firefighters ascending staircases against the tide of everyone else who understood what descending meant. The strangers who reach for each other's hands in corridors because some part of the human animal refuses to let another person disappear alone. He said he was not going to assign her motives. He could not see into her heart, and neither could the TV cameras, but he could read. And what he had read were the smallest words ever applied to the largest wound the country had absorbed in a generation. He said every gray-haired man she had dismissed an hour ago as a relic heard those words. And what they heard was not a nuanced position. What they heard was a woman choosing the lightest possible language for the heaviest possible day. The room went somewhere else, somewhere below argument. And then from the 3rd row of the gallery, a man stood up. He was older. He wore a windbreaker. He had one of those laminated cards on a lanyard that memorial organizations give to family members. He rose the way men rise, when the joints have to be talked into it, and a security officer moved toward him until the chairman raised one hand. Let him be. The man did not raise his voice. He spoke the way people speak when they have rehearsed something for years inside a car at night, steady and worn and without performance. He said his daughter was not some people. He said she had answered her phone on one of the upper floors and told her mother she loved her. And then the line had ended, and they had been living inside that ending for a very long time. He said he had taught school. He had coached youth baseball. He was not a museum exhibit. He was a father who had driven a significant distance to be in a room with a woman who had reduced the worst morning of his life to a vague rhetorical gesture. He asked quietly if she might be willing to call his daughter something, and then he did not sit down. He stood for the rest of the hearing. Every time a camera found Omar's face, he was behind her, still, patient, the way a man is patient when he has already lived through the worst thing. She pivoted. Of course she did. She had been doing it her whole career, and she was good at it. She told the room what this was really about, and her voice found its old register, urgent and climbing, because anger had always been reliable ground for her, and she was sprinting toward it. This was about a Muslim woman in a building that was not designed with her in mind. A refugee who had built something from nothing in a country that did not initially welcome her. A Black woman saying things that unsettled men who were more comfortable when the questions came from people who looked like them. She named the words Islamophobia, xenophobia. She said any honest person in the room recognized the machinery at work here. And for a moment, the room moved. This is the thing people forget about her. She is genuinely skilled. The current shifted. Pens went still. People who had been certain of where they stood went briefly uncertain. That word, that category of accusation has a gravitational pull that is almost physical. It has trained rooms to step backward for decades. And for 15 or 20 seconds, you could feel the instinct activate. Kennedy did not activate. He waited for her to finish, and then he answered without retreating and without raising his voice. He said he was not going to question her faith. He had served alongside members of her faith in that building, and not one of them would tell her he had ever made it a problem. He laid the page down flat. He said the people who had a problem with some people did something were not a demographic. They were not a political category. They were firefighter spouses. They were black mothers from New York boroughs. They were members of her own faith who had cringed when they heard the sentence. You could not gather all of them under one word and make them disappear. The word was not large enough to erase that many kinds of grief. The instinct left the room, and what replaced it was quieter and more permanent. It was permission to keep watching behind her, a young staffer bent close to her ear. Whispered something fast. Omar shook her head once, decisive, and waved her off. Whatever the staffer had seen or found, she did not want it. Not now. Not while the cameras were running. The cameras caught the whisper. They did not catch the words. But the room felt the temperature of the exchange, the way you feel a vibrating phone in someone else's pocket. The question entered the air and stayed there, unanswered. What had the staffer just seen? Kennedy took a sip of water and set the glass down with a small, deliberate sound. The click carried. He said he was nearly finished and then reached for more pages, which is the thing a man says when he has several things left to say. He said, everyone makes mistakes, and a single bad moment does not define a career. But this was not a single moment. He said it was a pattern, a choreography. He called it a dance and said the people paying her salary had a right to count the steps out loud at least once. He drew out 2 clip pages and held them side by side. He talked about a statement she had made years earlier about a foreign lobbying organization. The criticism that followed came not from across the aisle, but from her own party's leadership. And in response to that criticism, she had released a statement that he said he had read 4 times in the car that morning and could not find the apology inside of. She had, in a single document, expressed remorse and simultaneously affirmed that she had been correct. She had said she was listening and learning while making clear that she had learned nothing that required her to change her position. He squared the 2 pages against each other on the table. He said it was the most remarkable piece of writing he had encountered in his career. He said he could not have produced it if he had practiced in front of a mirror for a month. The gallery broke, a real laugh, uncontrolled and wide. He pressed on softly. He said it was not an apology. He said it was a hostage note with punctuation. You say the words so the cameras can record that you said it. You immediately retract it so your base knows you did not mean it. And you rely on both audiences being too distracted to compare what you said to each room. He said she had executed that particular maneuver by his count, every single time the moment required it. Say the thing. Gauge the reaction. Tell the people quoting you back to you verbatim that they misheard. Say the thing, she said with heat. Watch the room. And when the room doesn't receive it the way you want, tell them they're the ones who got it wrong. Nobody laughed now. It went somewhere below humor. Somewhere in the room where decisions calcify. Then he reached for the last document, stapled several pages. A second set clipped behind it. He said this was the one he had actually called her all the way down here about. And the room leaned forward the way rooms do when they feel the weight of something arriving. He said she had spoken at an event in Minneapolis, a hotel ballroom. Her own constituents, the people who had sent her to Washington. And midway through her remarks, she had switched languages. She had moved from English to Somali, a language the overwhelming majority of that room and virtually the entirety of the country could not follow. And in Somali, she had made a promise. She had told that room that the United States government would respond to their concerns, that as long as she held a seat in Congress, no one was going to take Somalia's seat. She had stood on American soil, speaking to American voters, and told them where her allegiances were pointed, and she had done it in a language specifically chosen to exclude the country she was serving from hearing it. He tapped the transcript. Her office had contested the translation. He said he was a fair man, so he was going to make her a fair offer. The page was right there in front of her, her words and her voice back to the room in English. Because a woman who said exactly what she meant in any language, which was what she had told him 20 minutes ago, could read her own remarks aloud to her own bosses without hesitation. He slid the page an inch toward her across the table. Tell this room what you told that room. She gave everything she had left, and what she had left was not nothing. She talked about coming to this country with nothing. Dust on her shoes, a refugee camp behind her. A language learned from scratch, mastered beyond the birthright speakers of it. A citizenship sworn and meant. A district that had chosen her again. and again and again. She talked about legislation she had authored that had fed children in this country while he was giving speeches about regional cuisine and family pets. She told him he had inherited. She told him he had never once in his life been required to prove he deserved a seat at any table. She told him she would not perform for his camera. She was a United States Congresswoman. She had earned the chair. She would not apologize for the scope of her questions or the language she asked them in. It was genuinely good. The room moved. The current came back to her side briefly. 3 seconds, 4. Long enough to wonder if she might survive this. Kennedy let it all land, and then the drawl went away. The folksy fell off him like a coat being shed. What was underneath was quiet and level and cold in the way that cold things are when they do not need to announce themselves. Nobody, he said, is questioning your life. I would shake your hand for what you built from what you started with, in any parking lot in America, and I would mean it down to my boots. He put his finger on the transcript. But what we are talking about is this. You speak English to us. You speak Somali to them. And in those 2 rooms, 2 different things get said. You built your career on counting on those rooms, never hearing each other. You went to a room full of the people who sent you here, and you switched languages so you could make a promise you would never make in English, to their faces, while they could hold you to it. He let that settle. That is not courage. He said, courage is saying the hard thing to the people who can call you on it. What you did is the opposite. You are not loyal to 2 countries. You are loyal to whichever room you are currently standing in. Nobody laughed, nobody moved. It had gone somewhere past argument and past performance and past the kind of thing you respond to into the kind of thing that just sits in a room after it has been said and does not leave. The chairman asked in the flat procedural voice of a man who has gaveled 1,000 hearings into order, whether the gentlewoman would read the highlighted section of her own remarks into the record, in English, so the committee could verify the accuracy of the translation. He framed it as a courtesy to her, a chance to correct the record on her own terms, in fairness to her. That was the cruelest part, and it was not cruel on purpose, it was just procedure. She picked up the page. The cameras caught that her hand was not steady. She looked at the words, her own words, in Somali with the English translation clipped directly behind. 2 pages held together by a single black binder clip. She got as far as the opening words, the United States, and then her own mind caught up to what her mouth was about to do when she stopped. She set the page down, and then she did a small thing, a thing that lasted perhaps 3 seconds and would be replayed for years. She worked the binder clip off the corner of the pages with her thumbnail. The way your hands find something to do when the rest of you has run out of options. The clip came off. The 2 pages separated. The Somali and the English, what she had said and what she had said it to mean. They slid apart on the table in front of every camera in that room. The clip hit the wood with a sound so small it should not have carried in a room that size. It carried 1 small metal binder clip in absolute silence. It rolled a few inches and stopped, and the room held the sound the way rooms hold sounds that become permanent. She did not put the pages back together. She folded her hands in her lap over the 2 separated documents and said nothing. The most quoted woman in Congress, the woman who had an answer for every room she had ever been in, said nothing at all. By mid-afternoon, the clip had a name, and the name was not kind. Somebody had cut the 40 seconds clean, the page sliding across the table, the instruction, the silence. The thumbnail working at the clip, the 2 pages drifting apart. The sound. They had posted it, and by evening you could not scroll past it. Nobody was arguing about it. That was the thing. No one was debating Somalia or sea rights or the accuracy of the translation or the politics of the hearing. The argument had been replaced by 40 seconds of a woman declining to read her own words in the language of the country she represented, on a loop available to anyone, forever. One network ran a chyron under the still frame. Her chair, her hands folded, the 2 separated pages visible on the table in front of her, white letters on black. Kennedy's line, loyal to whichever room you're standing in. No commentary beneath it, none needed. A Democratic congressman caught in the marble hallway outside told a reporter, off the record, checking both directions before he spoke, that the party had covered for her a long time, Years, you do it for your own people, but you cannot issue a statement that puts the lid back on a room that has already stopped being afraid of you. There is no communication strategy that unrings that specific bell. He walked away before the recorder came up. The father in the windbreaker drove home that night without the radio. He did not need the noise, somewhere past the state line alone in the dark, with the road unwinding in front of him. He said his daughter's name once, the way he said it most nights, and drove the rest of the way home in a silence that felt, for the first time in a long time, like something had been returned to it. In Mississippi, a gray-haired man sat at a kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and watched the 40 seconds one more time on a phone his granddaughter had shown him how to use. He was not a museum exhibit. He had built everything he owned with his hands in the decades behind him. He watched the clip, shook his head once the way men shake their heads when a thing has been settled, turned the phone face down on the table, and sat in the dark with the particular quiet satisfaction of a man who had been told he was too old to understand by someone who, when the moment came, turned out to be the one who could not read her own page out loud. John Kennedy gathered the two separated pages off the table and squared them, English against Somali, what was said and what was meant. He folded them once straight down the middle and slid them into the inside pocket of his jacket. He walked out past the cameras, past the reporters calling his name down the marble corridor, past the empty chair. He did not stop. He had asked a simple question, the kind a slow old man from Zachary could follow, the kind a person can answer plain. And the woman who had an answer for everything had answered it, just not out loud, not in English, not in the room that was paying her salary. Turns out the old man could follow just fine after all. Turns out the truth, when you finally catch it on the table in front of a camera, fits in one jacket pocket, and it never needed more than one page read aloud in plain English.